Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star known for his simplicity and humility, shocked everyone with a single act while riding the subway. What happens when a global superstar gives up his seat to a stranger? The moment was ordinary yet extraordinary, and when people realized who he was, things took an unexpected turn. What he did next will leave you speechless. It was a typical busy afternoon in New York City. The subway platform was crowded with commuters, some rushing home after work, others lost in their thoughts. The city's energy was palpable, yet each person seemed to be caught in their own little world. Among the busy crowd, a man stepped onto the subway train, blending in with the crowd, almost unnoticed. That man was Keanu Reeves. Dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, looking like any other person, he wasn't the flashy celebrity people typically associate with Hollywood stars. He wasn't drawing attention to himself or trying to stand out. On the crowded train, no one recognized him at first. People were too absorbed in their own little worlds, some looking at their phones, others just staring into the distance, lost in their thoughts. But Keanu's heart was bigger than his fame. As the train rattled through the city, a woman entered, struggling with a heavy bag, clearly exhausted from a long day. She was trying to maintain her balance as the train jolted and swayed, looking around for a seat. Keanu, noticing her struggle, did something that would go unnoticed by many in a busy, fast-paced world. He immediately stood up from his seat and gestured for her to take it. It wasn't a grand gesture, but something about it stood out. He didn't make a fuss, didn't draw attention to himself. He just quietly offered the seat. The woman, taken by surprise, accepted his kindness without thinking much of it. She thanked him casually, unaware of who the man was. But soon, whispers began to spread through the train. Someone had recognized him. They quietly said, "That's Keanu Reeves." The moment the name was mentioned, something shifted. The air in the subway car seemed to freeze for a split second. The realization hit everyone at once. Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star, the action hero, the internet's favorite humble guy, was just another human being on the subway, doing something as simple as giving up his seat for someone in need. What happened next was even more unexpected. The passengers, who had been lost in their own worlds, suddenly began to pay attention. Some people discreetly took out their phones, quietly snapping pictures. Others even started recording videos. It wasn't about a star showing off his generosity. It was about witnessing someone so famous, yet so grounded, being humble in the most ordinary of settings. As the train continued its journey through the bustling city, the atmosphere was noticeably different. What had started as a simple act of kindness soon became a talking point. Whispers of Keanu's gesture spread across the subway car, and what seemed like an ordinary commute was now charged with an unexpected sense of awe. The passengers couldn't help but watch, their curiosity piqued by the quiet humility of a man they had all just learned was one of the most famous people in the world. The woman, who had been completely unaware of Keanu's identity, was still settling in, holding her bag tightly in her lap. She was focused on her own comfort, unaware of the ripple effect her simple encounter with him had just created. Meanwhile, the eyes of the passengers shifted. A few tried to act normal, looking away, but the energy in the car had changed. The celebrity who had just blended in with the crowd was now the focal point. A few moments passed, and then it happened. One of the passengers, someone who had initially been too absorbed in their phone to notice, looked up and gasped. "Wait a minute," they said under their breath, their eyes widening. "That's Keanu Reeves." Within seconds, the realization spread like wildfire. The train, already packed with people, seemed to grow even quieter as more passengers looked around, trying to confirm what they had just heard. Some of them couldn't believe their ears. Was this really Keanu Reeves, the same man who had starred in iconic films like The Matrix and John Wick? Was he really the same guy who had become known for his down-to-earth attitude and humility? The star who was constantly praised for his generosity and kindness? It was hard to wrap their heads around the fact that he was sitting just a few feet away from them, behaving no differently than anyone else on that subway. For the first time, the woman with the bag looked up and seemed to realize that she was sharing the same space as a global icon. She quickly glanced around, noticing that people were staring at her now, some even smiling at her with knowing looks. She felt a bit awkward, but still unaware of the full weight of what had just transpired. As more people recognized Keanu, they couldn't help but smile at the irony. Here was someone who could have easily surrounded himself with bodyguards, ridden in a private car, and avoided any inconvenience. Yet here he was, on the subway, just like the rest of them, simply being kind to a stranger. The tension in the air slowly turned into something positive: admiration, respect, and a sense of awe for a man who had every reason to be distant but chose to be humble instead. In that moment, something unusual happened. The usual rush and urgency of New York City, where people tend to be in a hurry, faded into the background. For a brief moment, the subway car was filled with a sense of shared humanity, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness don't need to be loud, don't need to be grand. They can simply be a quiet, unexpected gesture, carried out by someone who doesn't need recognition, but somehow gets it anyway. As the subway ride continued, something unexpected began to unfold. The passengers, who had been lost in their own worlds just moments earlier, now seemed united by a shared sense of wonder. It wasn't just about seeing Keanu Reeves on the subway. It was about witnessing something much deeper. An icon, a superstar, behaving in a way that no one had expected. People started talking. They weren't talking about his fame, his movies, or his roles. They were talking about the way he had simply stood up, offered his seat, and gone back to being a regular person. A few whispered, "That's what makes him different. He's so real." It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It felt like a moment that transcended celebrity and reminded everyone of the power of everyday decency. What followed next was equally striking. People began to smile at one another. It was as if Keanu had sparked a sense of connection between them all. The usual coldness of the subway, the unspoken rule of not making eye contact with strangers, was momentarily lifted. In a space full of rushed commuters, people found themselves acknowledging each other. The usual silence that hung in the air was replaced by a soft buzz of conversation. It was subtle, but noticeable. Some people took it upon themselves to approach him, albeit nervously. A young man, likely in his 20s, walked up to Keanu and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves. I just wanted to say you're an inspiration. Thank you for being such a role model." Keanu smiled warmly, acknowledging the young man with a quiet nod. He didn't make a big deal of it. He didn't ask for attention. His response was simple, yet it carried a weight of gratitude. "Thank you," Keanu replied softly. "I just try to do what's right." For the next few stops, the atmosphere in the subway was unlike anything most people had experienced before. Some were still whispering about the encounter, others smiled as if they had just witnessed a small miracle. The simplicity of the moment was what made it so powerful. It wasn't grandiose, it wasn't planned. It was a random act of kindness that reminded everyone of the human side of celebrities, something that so often gets lost behind the glossy facade of fame. As the train approached the next stop, Keanu stood up, ready to get off. A few passengers, still amazed by the encounter, couldn't resist but thank him as he passed by. "Take care, Mr. Reeves, you're a legend," someone called out. Keanu gave a small wave, his eyes crinkling into a smile. What struck everyone was how comfortable he was, how easy he made it seem to be humble. In a world where celebrities are often surrounded by cameras, bodyguards, and attention, here was a man who didn't need any of that. His actions spoke louder than any interview or red carpet appearance ever could. As the train doors closed and the subway moved on, the passengers who had shared that moment could feel something shift inside them. Maybe it was a small shift, but it was real. A simple reminder that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes it can change the way you see the world. As the subway ride continued, it was clear that Keanu Reeves' gesture had left a lasting impression. But what made this moment even more remarkable was the silence that followed. It wasn't the typical New York City rush where people scramble to get off and on the train, lost in their own world. This time, the air was filled with a sense of reflection. People were still processing what they had witnessed, an act of kindness, not for the cameras, not for anyone's benefit, but simply because it was the right thing to do. It wasn't long before the subway car began to feel more like a community. Passengers, some of whom had been complete strangers to one another just moments ago, started to engage in quiet conversations. They weren't talking about Keanu's fame or how famous he was. They weren't discussing his films or his career. Instead, they were talking about the bigger picture, about what it means to be kind in a world that often values success and status over simple human decency. It was a shift from the usual fast-paced, impersonal nature of a subway ride to something more connected, more thoughtful. One woman, who had been sitting across from Keanu, caught the eye of a nearby stranger. "You know," she said softly, "it's not every day you see something like that. It was so genuine." The stranger nodded. "Yeah, it's like he didn't even think about it. He just did it." They weren't the only ones discussing it. Throughout the subway car, small groups began to reflect on Keanu's actions. "It's kind of a reminder of what we've lost," one man said, shaking his head. "In this rush of life, we forget what it means to be kind." The conversations continued as the train made its way through the city, with many passengers agreeing that Keanu's small gesture had touched something deeper within them. It wasn't just about a celebrity doing something nice. It was about reminding people that kindness doesn't have to come with a price tag, and it doesn't need to be grand to be meaningful. What's more, the interaction didn't seem forced. Keanu didn't want praise or attention for what he had done. He didn't need validation. He didn't even acknowledge the whispering passengers or the people snapping pictures. He simply did what any good person would do. He helped someone in need and then carried on with his day. This was the part that struck people the most, how effortless and natural it all felt. There was no hidden agenda behind his actions, no desire for social media clout or recognition. Keanu had simply stepped up when he saw someone in need, and his humility was evident to everyone around him. As the train neared its next stop, passengers seemed to hold on to the quiet sense of connection they had experienced during the ride. In a city that's known for its noise, hustle, and indifference, this moment had given them something to reflect on, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can still have a ripple effect, even in the most unlikely places. The train doors opened, and as Keanu prepared to leave, one of the passengers turned to another and whispered, "Maybe we all need a little more Keanu in our lives." As the subway doors slid open and Keanu Reeves stepped off the train, a noticeable shift lingered in the air. The small, intimate act of giving up his seat had set something in motion that no one could fully explain. People had seen celebrities before, but seeing them act with such humility left a much deeper mark. The moment wasn't about being starstruck. It was about realizing that, despite his global fame, Keanu was still just another person, someone who shared the same human experiences as anyone else. The subway car began to empty, but the people who had witnessed this quiet act of kindness carried something with them. As they made their way through the crowded stations, something about the energy in the city seemed lighter. The usual rush, the hurried footsteps, the lack of eye contact, everything had changed, if only for a moment. People were a little more aware of one another, a little kinder. One man, who had been sitting just a few seats away from Keanu, found himself reflecting on his own behavior. He had been a regular commuter, always rushing from one place to the next. He hadn't thought much about others during his daily routine, but now he felt different. The way Keanu had acted was so simple, yet profound. It made him question his own interactions with the world. "Maybe I need to slow down, look around, and pay attention," he thought. It wasn't just the man who had been sitting nearby. The ripple effect had spread far and wide throughout the car. For the first time in a long time, people seemed to remember what it felt like to be considerate, to step outside their own worlds and look at the people around them. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the small, thoughtful moments that often go unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. One passenger, who had witnessed Keanu's simple gesture, shared her thoughts with her friend. "It's like he doesn't expect anything in return," she said. There was no, "Look at me, I'm doing something nice." He just did it. And that's rare these days. Her friend nodded in agreement. Yeah, it's easy to forget that a simple act of kindness can mean so much. It shouldn't take a celebrity to remind us. It wasn't just the passengers on the subway who had been affected. As the train continued to move through the city, some commuters started to reflect on how they interacted with the people around them. The act had created a collective consciousness, a reminder that kindness and humility weren't just about appearances or social media likes. They were about human connection and empathy. As the train made its final stop, the passengers began to slowly file out, each carrying a piece of the experience with them. The day had started like any other, but for those who had witnessed Keanu's simple act of kindness, it had ended with a newfound sense of appreciation for the small gestures that often go unnoticed. In a world where fame, wealth, and status seem to dominate the conversation, Keanu's act had become a symbol of something more important, something that people could hold on to and carry with them. It was a reminder that kindness, in its purest form, could still make a difference even in the most unlikely places. Days passed after the subway ride, but the ripple effect of Keanu Reeves' small act of kindness continued to reverberate. News outlets picked up the story, but not in the typical sensationalized way that celebrities often made headlines. This time, the story wasn't about a scandal or drama. It was about a quiet, genuine moment that reminded everyone of the power of simple human decency. The footage of Keanu standing up for a woman, offering her his seat without hesitation, spread quickly across social media. People weren't just praising the Hollywood star for being nice. They were reflecting on how something so small could have such a profound impact on the way we interact with each other. But it wasn't just fans who were talking about it. Influencers, writers, and even people who weren't usually interested in celebrity gossip began to share their thoughts. It was as if Keanu's act had reawakened something in society, a desire for connection and compassion in a time where everyone seemed too busy or too self-absorbed to notice each other. People on Twitter shared their own experiences of kindness. Others posted about how Keanu's gesture inspired them to be more considerate in their daily lives. One of the most powerful aspects of the moment was that it wasn't about trying to change the world with one huge gesture. Instead, it was about shifting the focus to the everyday actions that often go unnoticed. Keanu didn't need to speak about his kindness. It was shown in his actions. And that was enough. The fact that he hadn't been looking for recognition made the moment feel all the more authentic, and it made people stop and think about how much power they had to influence the world around them, simply by being kind. As the story continued to circulate, people started to see beyond Keanu's fame. They began to understand that it wasn't his celebrity status that made the moment special. It was his humanity. Keanu's willingness to be kind without any expectation of a reward or recognition became a symbol of what we all should strive for. It wasn't about what others could give you, but rather what you could offer others, no matter who they were or where they came from. At the heart of it all, Keanu's subway act was a reminder that acts of kindness don't need to be grand to be significant. They can be quiet, personal moments, ones that might seem small in the grand scheme of things, but can change someone's day, or, in this case, someone's outlook on life. His simple action left people with a sense of hope, a belief that kindness still exists in a world that often feels divided and disconnected. As the weeks went on, more and more people started to look at kindness differently. No longer was it seen as something that required a grand gesture, but rather as something that could be practiced in the simplest of ways. It was about holding the door for someone, smiling at a stranger, or helping someone when they didn't ask for it. Keanu's subway moment had reminded the world of the impact these small, thoughtful actions could have. Keanu's simple act on the subway wasn't just a reminder of his humility, it was a call to action for all of us. In a world that often prioritizes fame, wealth, and status, sometimes the most important thing we can do is remember to be kind. So next time you're out and about, think about the impact you can have on someone's day. One small gesture could change everything. Let me know in the comments how you've seen small acts of kindness change someone's life. Don't forget to share this story to spread the message of kindness.